I'm very pleased to present to you Ellen Davidson, who is the staff attorney for the Legal Aid Society. She's going to present to us Good Cause Eviction 101, how our new law protects market rate tenants, and frankly, how we can make the law even stronger in the next session. Yeah, thank
you. Can everyone hear me? All right. Let me start by saying I have 10 minutes to talk, and I can talk about housing for 3 hours. So this is going to be an abbreviated talk. There's a one-pager when you come in all about good cause eviction law that has more information. So understand this should pique your interest, and please look at the one-pager because there's more complete information in it. So what is good cause eviction? Let's start with, some basic things you should understand. What is it? Well, a lot of you in this audience already have it. If you are rent regulated, public housing, project-based Section 8, Mitchell-Lama, tax credit buildings, live in affordable housing, at the end of your lease term, your landlord gives you a new lease. And what increases you have depend on the law that governs your type of housing. But for many tenants, almost half of the tenants who live in New York City, before April, at the end of their lease terms, the landlord could say, I'm not renewing your lease. The landlord could double their rents, and it was completely legal. And the good cause eviction law was meant to address it. However, it doesn't cover everyone, which is one of the things that I think our senator was alluding to that maybe we need to fix. But let's talk about who is covered. The law assumes you're covered and then gives a very long list of exemptions. If you live in an apartment that's owned by a small landlord, and I will define that in a second. If you live in an owner-occupied building and there are 10 or less units in your building, you are not covered. There's a high rent exemption, so it's if you live in an apartment where the rent is 245% of fair market rents, and just for an example, for one bedroom, that's $6,000, you are not covered. If you are a renter or an owner who live in a co-op or condo building, you aren't covered. And if you are in a building that has a certificate of occupancy that was issued after January 1st, 2009, you are not covered. Small landlord does not mean small building. It is about how many buildings your landlord owns, and if you count up all those buildings, you have to your landlord is covered if he owns 11 or more units. So if you're in a 6-unit building and your landlord owns 3 6-unit buildings, you are covered by the law. I understand that most housing in New York State is not owned by individuals, which makes this very hard to figure out. The law asks about the natural person who's behind the LLC, and there are disclosure requirements that LLCs have to give to tenants so they know whether or not they're covered. So what do you get if you're covered? Oh, and let me just say, in the one-pager that is in the front, there is a link to an excellent site by Just Fix called Who Owns What that I encourage everyone to look at. What do you get if you're covered by the law? You get some limitations on rent increases. The law defines what they call a reasonable rent increase based on what the change in inflation is year by year, plus 5%, but no more than 5%. And HCR will put on its website and has done for this year what that increase will be for this year, which is 8.82%. But what you should know is that there's no agency that oversees this law. Unfortunately, all of you are responsible for knowing what the law is, and reminding your landlords at every moment that they are not following it. So if you are covered by this law and your landlord is giving you a rent increase of 20%, you need to contact your landlord and say, I'm covered by this new law, give me a lease that complies with it. And landlords have been doing that once they're called out on it, unfortunately. The other way that this increase comes into effect is as a defense in a non-payment case, but I am sure all of you would rather not be defending in a non-payment case because being in housing court sucks. Landlords can get even a higher increase than this already high increase, but they have to base it on increased costs and not on increased market, which I'm sure this community has seen again and again, that as market prices go up, landlords try to claim that they charge more money. This purpose of this law is to say if your costs go up, maybe you can get more, but not just because the market is crazy. So what are the other good causes other than non-payment of rent? It's pretty obvious: breach of lease, nuisance, illegal use, unreasonable refusal of access. If a tenant refuses to sign a lease renewal that has reasonable terms in it, that might be a cause for eviction. Owner use, if the landlord's trying to recapture the unit for them or their family member. However, if the tenant is disabled or is 65 or older, the landlord can't use that provision for this. Demolition of housing accommodation, which means demolition of building not substantially repaired of the apartment, and intention to withdraw from the housing market. There are lots of notice requirements that the landlords have to give tenants, and if they don't give those notices, they can't sue you in housing court. And if they try to get you to sign a lease that says I'm not covered by good cause, they can't do that. You can't give up your rights by signing a piece of paper. And so that's like my basic, as short as I can do it, good cause eviction law. Please look at the materials that are on the front desk. But just to say that's not, it's not the end of the story. We have so many more things we need to fight for. We need to make some changes to this law, technical changes. We need to eventually cover more people. We've been fighting for the last couple of years for a couple of pieces of legislation that we need to get done. Assemblymember Rosenthal is the prime sponsor of the Housing Access Voucher Program. We need to get rental subsidy into people's hands. The rent is too damn high. We can delay or try to lower increases as much as possible, but the truth of the matter is no one can afford their rent in this state. And so we've been trying to push for a state Section 8 program that would mimic the federal Section 8 program and make things more affordable for people. We've also been fighting for the Tenant Opportunity to Purchase Act, which is a piece of legislation that would give tenants the opportunity to try to match prices when their buildings are up for sale. Some of this is about expanding home ownership, but some of it is about working with mission-driven non-for-profits, assigning them rights, and getting housing out of the hands of slumlords and into the hands of people who actually care about our communities. Those two bills, we've been fighting for a couple of years. We need help from all of you. The Housing Access Voucher, I should say, is an incredibly popular program. There's one person in the state who hates it, and her name is Governor Hochul. So if any of you know her, please tell her we need this. But we're also planning on fighting this year to reform the Rent Guidelines Board, which desperately needs it. We have a Social Housing Development Authority bill. We want to create a new housing authority in the state that will actually build mixed income, affordable housing, something like the Mitchell-Lamas of the past. We understand that this is going to cost money, but there's nothing more important than being able to afford your housing and be stable in your housing. And honestly, what else are we spending money on? We should be spending money to make sure that we all can live in our communities and contribute to our communities. And so I expect it's going to be the fight of my life to see a social housing development authority and new Mitchell-Lamas and new public housing and new social housing. But I think it's a fight that it's worth having, and I'm hoping you will all join me in that. And then lastly, we are looking at some bills to, expand rent regulation. Right now, there are some limitations on what buildings could be rent regulated. They have to be built and occupied before 1974. That's a really long time ago. That law was written in 1974, and no one has reconsidered whether those terms make sense anymore. And we want to have that conversation because as proud as I am that we finally got Good Cause done, rent regulation is better. And everyone should have the opportunity to be rent regulated. And so that's what I'm fighting for. And I hope you all join me with that. Thank you.